What's up, Adderall here, coming at you live. We got a story tonight of medieval origin that has a D to the D&D inspired flavor. It's about like this knight who fucked up or something, and he's like in a dungeon, and like the other knights don't like him or whatever. But what's wild about this one is it exists in more than one genre. Yes, it's got the D&D flavor, but yet it's got that horror spice. Oh, I got chocolate in your peanut butter. Oh, I got D&D in my horror. It's a long one, so it's going to be in 2 parts, my friends. The name of tonight's story is Calamity Come by Montsho Shelby. There was an eerie quiet that rang out. All hope fled. The light shone through in small, nearly imperceptible dots that had escaped cracks in the stone. A lone warrior stared at the wall, focusing on nothing but the horrors of his past deeds in that formless gray. There was no death for the damned, just temporary reprieves from suffering. He was sentenced to die, but he was sure that wasn't the end of his torments, whether he may be sent into the delights of heaven or the heat of hell. The shadows stretched and shrank, conjuring in the darkness formless mockeries of past sins. Heathro's ears perked up as he heard the unmistakable cadence of footfalls on stone. It could easily have been a trick of the senses, for he hadn't been fed in a month's time, and madness may have taken him completely. He survived by sipping at putrid drops of water that fell through the ceiling and feasted on whatever lower forms of life that happened by. The door of his cell slowly opened. The creaking may have been as quiet as a whisper, but it was as loud as a tree falling in the woods to him. Torch fire peeked inside and bloomed out. It was overwhelming his senses, for his were eyes that had only known darkness for untold days. Sir Heathrow. Or Heathrow now, I suppose, the voice said in a low tone. Heathrow covered his ears as if he were being yelled at. I'd prefer to have you rot and die in here, but it has been decided that you will be given the choice between death or suicide. Heathrow didn't speak. He wasn't sure if he remembered how. You are to face the great Calamity in open combat for the safety of the realm, or die. The voice paused as if giving Heathrow time to consider, because some men may well face the executioner's axe over the creative suffering the Calamity would enact. He continued, Save me the trouble and die now. You should not walk amongst the living after what you did. Every moment you draw breath is an offense to decency. The voice waited as if for a reply, but only saw the frail broken man scurrying from the light, as if he had adopted the traits of the vermin he consumed. He stood up, then turned to exit, prepared to leave Heathrow in the darkness until better men found him worthy of death. I will do this thing, or die trying, Heathrow said in a raspy croak. The figure in the torchlight scoffed loudly in honest disappointment. He wasn't freed from bondage right away. Perhaps Sir Ishmael didn't bother to relay the order right away, or perhaps they needed further deliberation, because they had second-guessed their move of desperation. Part of Heathrow was excited to be disemboweled by the Calamity, for it would spell the end of his troubled existence. Yet tethers of duty still shackled his mind, regardless of his situation. The thought hadn't even occurred to him to escape his bondage by lying and slipping away. And as much as the order despised him, they still managed to honor his word as if it were an absolute. His motives were found despicable, but even thrown in the deepest dungeon, his integrity was never in question. He was guided upwards by way of weak torchlight into a realm that he was no longer a part of. Heathrow's bones ached. He was sure he smelled as bad as he looked, but he was used to his own stink. It was only until he was out in the world with sweet smells to contrast his offensiveness did he notice. The Order Knight Leftor guided him through the castle that he knew more intimately than his own mind. They put Leftor with him because he was the most recent knight, just barely out of being Sir Bentel's squire. He led him to two women in the horse stables that covered their mouths at Heathrow's approach, which was quite impressive that they deemed him more disgusting than horse shit. Leftor held out his hand to be custodian to his dirt-smeared tunic when these women started their task. Heathrow felt himself being nudged slightly from these women's violent accidental pushes, from the force of their scrubbing motion. He was so weak they moved him, a feat that would require 3 strong men at least. Now 2 determined chambermaids with scrub brushes was good enough. He did not put odds on himself for surviving the calamity. In his mind, this was merely a choice to die on his feet. Heathrow had no illusions about what he was asked to do, and he was never meant to return. He was fine with his fate, whether he died or lived. Leftor gave Heathrow his dignity and didn't watch the cleaning too intently. If he were in the midst of a mindless murderer, his eyes would never stray. Leftor couldn't conceive of a world in which he'd have to keep his eyes peeled for treachery in Heathrow. But then again, he wasn't cast away in the deepest dungeon for a minor offense. The young knight had indeed heard the rumors, and as rumors were wont to do, they grew and festered, and evolved into fantastical tall tales of legend. He yearned to hear the truth as told by Heathrow, but by the lips of those who spouted the rhetoric of divine law, he was not to speak to him more than was deemed absolutely necessary. When he thought on this edict, it was certainly worded in a way to give a knight with a curious and clever nature room for interpretation of what was considered absolutely necessary. I was ordered not to speak to you unless it was absolutely necessary, but you are under no such restriction. I think it in my best interest to know your intentions, said Leftor. Heathrow thought for a long while, as if he hadn't yet recaptured the rhythm and timing that conversation demanded. I have no intentions, Leftor, other than to face the calamity, and if you think I had any intentions on running or escaping your custody, I do not, and would not. As far as I'm concerned, my oath to the order stands. Whether you choose to accept me as your brother has no bearing on if I accept you as mine. I will never hurt you. Leftor believed Heathrow as he may words spoken from his own lips. The chambermaid's pots were nearly blacked with the filth of unchecked human erosion. They swapped out buckets. Leftor turned and looked at Heathrow, who was a hollow shell of his former self after his incarceration. Fight the calamity? He wasn't even sure if he would be able to don his armor in such a state. I think it is necessary to ask if you need help in this quest, Leftor said. Heathrow smiled, despite the shriveled mess his face was. No, brother. This mission was constructed to be my demise, not a task that could actually be rightfully completed. I will fight this thing with all the will I have left to give and die in battle. My corpse will serve as a marker of warning to true heroes of legend when they come for the beast. Why would the Order wish you killed in that way instead of honestly going straight for the thing? Not for me to say. I may well have lost faith in the monarchy, but never my brothers. The chambermaids finished their duty and dried off the disgraced knight with a towel. They nodded to Leftor, then signaled him their part in this was done. The next phase of this long and largely ceremonial process was to bring the condemned to face the king's judgment. His words were handed down from the heavens, directly channeling the will of the gods. Leftor never knew if these high-minded words were hyperbole or truth, but in being a knight, one could not question the path that the Order set forth for you to walk, which in hindsight must have been Heathrow's greatest trespass. The throne room was sparse. It was built in gray brick, which commanded and inspired a measure of awe. There was a feast set out for a very small contingent of knights and the king. Most of the rest of the room was absent its usual mirth. Heathrow made note of the somber atmosphere being bred, most likely for his benefit. The tales of what he did made him a pariah, and even someone as lowly as a peasant looked down on him in disgust. Perhaps he deserved the torment of social isolation, but then again, perhaps not. King Cypress looked down at Heathrow in judgment, and the knight had seen that doomed look before. That was a glare meant for the condemned, those who were devoid of hope. He had seen that look on the king's face hundreds of times when judgment was clear and the only thing left to do was to speak the words aloud. Well, of all the people in the world I'd see standing before me in judgment, you are the last I'd expect. There was a tribunal of 7, as was the norm. There was a time he might well be in said tribunal. The throne room was modest, but geometric patterns inlaid in the floors and columns revealed the true worth of the space. The breeze wafted in from the huge gaping hole in the ceiling, which had been there long before he were alive, and in fact several generations before the king. "I am sorry I have disappointed you, my king," Heathrow said penitently. "You're sorry, I'm sorry, so that makes us a sad, sorry bunch." The king paused again, as if saddened by the weight he'd bear down on his once dutiful knight. "Do you feel remorse for what you did?" the king questioned. Heathrow searched inside of himself, hoping to feel the answer that the king wanted to hear, as if maybe there was a nugget of doubt in him, but he couldn't find it, and it never crossed his mind to lie. Being a knight who had fallen out of favor had no bearing on the code he had lived his entire life by. The bigger sin would have been if his disgrace somehow released him of all notions of duty. "I'm sorry, my king. I'm sorry I feel nothing for the things I have done," Heathrow stated matter-of-factly, with no passion in favor for or against the recollections of his trespass. "If that is so, my duty as king must come first, and I will show you no mercy. I shall not take mercy, my king. Instead of an execution in the conventional manner, I will give you a choice to choose death in conflict with the great Calamity." Leftor stepped up and spoke, and the way the room lit up, it was completely unexpected and out of turn. "And what if he manages to defeat the beast?" Leftor said with confidence. Heathrow raised his hand as if to cue the young knight to stand down. There were a few chuckles amongst the assembled tribunal. The king's face was devoid of mirth and above levity. If he managed to defeat the beast, then he would present himself to this tribunal for a new judgment. Leftor looked to Heathrow as if considering what his role in this bizarre form of execution was. "I wish to accompany the condemned on his quest if it pleases this court," said Leftor. "I can't spare a capable knight to feed the beast," the king said. "With all due respect, if we enter to fail the beast, we should fail the beast, not give anyone a quest that is impossible to undertake." "That is all, Sir Leftor. I have spoken." Leftor paused and assumed that was going to be his position. "If this ex-knight is condemned to die, someone should be there to at least see if he goes through with it. If you truly believed he was loyal enough to his king, his order, and his country, then he and yourself must truly believe he is still a knight, because there is no ordinary men that would willingly submit themselves to death in such a way," said the young knight. The king was now placed in a social conundrum. In his heart, he knew Heathrow was a knight of the order, and he was on some level conceding he was still a knight. The tribunal instantly saw the subtle manipulation, and half the 7 chuckled at the clever loophole of logic. "So be it. You shall serve as his witness to ensure he dies properly," King Cypress said. Heathrow smiled at the move, but at the same time he was concerned the boy was damning himself to his fate. The day was beautiful, but Heathrow's lack of visual stimulus made even a mundane sight into an existential moment of self-actualization. He managed to don his armor, but it was big to him. He was a shell of his former self, but only in physical splendor. His conviction alone bore the weight of the 30 pounds he lost. The burgeoning sun poured into the stables and oozed through cracks in the wood as the 2 men outfitted their beasts for extended travel. "I thank you, but I cannot let you die for my sake," Heathrow said to Leftor while tightening a leather strap on his white stallion. "Well, brother, my life isn't for you to give or take. I can risk it however I see fit. I'm glad you come. I hope you live to learn from this mistake. Answer me this, brother, and I'll never bring it up again if your answer is no. Would you had done it for me? Hefro slowly mounted his calm mare and smiled. He didn't answer because they both knew his response. Leftor smiled, hopped onto his black stallion, and followed Hefro into the majesty of the rising sun. The trek towards the Calamity took them through the barbed fields and lawless wasteland where only the most skilled tenders of earth could make anything grow. The two passed other travelers, bandits, and brigands, but the armor of a knight of Outer Bast was a strong deterrent against undue robbery attempts. After a day's ride, Hefro seemed as if he had reclaimed his grasp on reality and his confidence in the limits of his body. Do you want to spar a bit, just to ensure your skills haven't fled you? Leftor asked. That may be a good idea. I will die, but at least I don't have to embarrass myself before I'm put down. The two knights stopped their black and white stallions with the backdrop of the Osseram Ocean on the east and the pulverized gravel that passed for sand to the west. How many days do you think this will take? Asked Hefro while dismounting. You don't know? Are you sure your faculties are still in order? Things change, Leftor, and I'd rather not assume. Hefro drew his sword slowly with the weight of ceremony behind it. Leftor drew his sword in kind. The malnourished knight inspected his weapon, and it had been maintained and taken care of in his absence. Thank you, said Hefro. Leftor knew exactly why he was grateful, but he couldn't take full credit. Most of the order cared for your equipment. We all believed that you'd get out of this. We all figured the king would change his mind. Since I am most likely going to die at your side, I don't think a little clarification as to what you were imprisoned for is out of line. Hefro raised his sword arm and rotated it just to see if he still had his full range of motion. Why don't we make it sporting? For every hit I get, I will ask you a question you must answer, and for every hit you land on me, I will answer one of your questions, said Hefro. But I've never beat you. If you ever had a chance, it'd be now. You make a good point, said Leftor, raising his sword to the ready. Shield? Leftor asked. If you want. Hefro didn't take his shield off the horse, then held his sword two-handed in a low guard. It felt as if he may have needed both hands on the weapon just for the strength to return to him. Hefro nodded as if ready. Leftor returned his gaze in kind. The heavy swords clashed. Leftor went in slow, not sure what state Hefro's month of imprisonment left him in. Even absent his strength, Hefro was formidable. He altered his strategy immediately, knowing he was the weaker man, and it was as if Leftor was engaged with a stranger. Hefro didn't quite have a style of fighting that one could conventionally quantify. He fought not to lose, so his style changed to accommodate that philosophy. The younger warrior came in high overhead, but Hefro completely sidestepped it and melted himself on Leftor's far right. He bumped the back of his knee slightly, and when Leftor dipped, he smacked the side of his armor with a resounding ting noise. That's one for me. What question to ask? I have it. What do you fight for? Hefro asked while readying his weapon for further practice. He probed out in jabs, meant more for exercise and setup than for finishing blows. I fight for myself, my God, my people, and my brothers. Yes, you do. But simplify your answer, Hefro insisted as he blocked 2 exploratory parries. For others, Leftor said, just barely holding off the onslaught. Hefro began visibly sweating. His body had atrophied, unused to the physical stamina one needed to possess to be a successful killer. Yes, but even simpler. In the end, there are only 2 things I found that people live for: love or immortality. Perhaps your motivation is love over immortality. We should take a break. You are overexerting, Leftor insisted. This is friendly. I think I need to know where my boundaries are. So, I must exhaust myself. Hefro spun and rolled into Leftor's guard. It was an unsafe maneuver, but it was so unexpected, Leftor didn't see it coming. Hefro tapped his blade onto the ex-squire's chest plate. "Your question?" Leftor insisted. Hefro backed up into a ready position. "I'm not done with this one. So, if you sought immortality, you would seek it to immortalize your name with deeds more grand than whatever had come before in hopes they would live on in the hearts and minds of the people. I don't think that is completely correct, sir. You don't need payment or adoration. The mere idea of the right thing serves me well enough. So, you do it for good feelings, and what is that?" The two engaged in mild sword work. "You make it seem selfish when I do not believe it is." "It isn't selfish, it's just the driving force, boiled down to its simplest elements. It's not a good thing or bad thing, most knights feel as you do. Or they do it for immortality, which some may say is just another form of love. So, my second question, what would you consider a man that does it for no reason?" Leftor thought as he worked his sword defensively. "No reason? Not even money?" "Not even money. He does it to do it with no interest in love or immortality." Leftor worked his blade in a complicated pattern, and now he too was feeling the slight pangs of exhaustion. "Perhaps a madman, or perhaps lost," Hefro said while momentarily catching the glint of the morning sun and bouncing it into Leftor's eye for a slight distraction. Hefro took a step inside Leftor's guard and stopped himself before he made a downwards chop connect, because he had tried a similar maneuver earlier. Though it was certain the upwards chop would have connected, so would Leftor's downward thrust into his gut. "A question for us both then." "No, please, we both would have been struck." "No, a deal's a deal. Let me finish my point before I ask my final question. As a knight, I no longer seek immortality. Whatever deeds I do, I do. I care little for where I stand in the afterlife and love. Through the years, I have lost most notions of love and brotherhood. I love you and my brothers, but I don't fight for anyone anymore. I derive no pleasure, small or big. I would not call myself lost, but dead. For what is a man with no passion if not dead? I was dead before I was put in that dungeon, Leftor. I was merely hoping to be put down. So, the question to you is this. Who do you want to follow? A dead man?" Leftor put his sword away because there was no practice or question that could follow such a declaration. "I don't think you're dead. You must do it for some reason. You don't want me to die, so you still care about something. I didn't say I didn't care for anything. I just don't care what I do anymore. I have passions for nothing. So, when I was offered the chance to die by the hands of the Calamity, well, it felt a lot like a release. I do not wish for you to die. For me, what I seek is death." Hefro mounted his horse and Leftor did the same. The young knight had completely and utterly figured he'd ask the senior knight about the events that led him to his disgrace and imprisonment, but he pivoted. The current state of his brother at arms, his friend, was paramount over the triviality of his past transgressions. "When did you lose your passion?" Leftor asked with caution and honest concern. Hefro thought for a long while, letting the rhythmic gallop of the horses seep into the two men's conversation. "I'm not sure if it was a moment or a switch that flipped. One day I got the distinct impression that nothing we do matters. Therefore, any action I may take is as good as any other." "Give me an example. Make it clearer for me." "Do you remember when we rode on Austin Narrows?" "I do." "We fought them over a land dispute. Both sides had an equal claim. I took the lives of 2 knights of the Narrows, and I saw in them the same honor and righteousness as us. It could have been just as easy you or I fell in that pointless skirmish, and they could have won the day. In the end, were we more correct indeed? Or were we just those that won the cosmic coin flip? Is there truly a righteous cause? Is this the sort of thing I'd want to be known for? The sort of deed that I want written into the stars? Heathrow shook his head in disgust. Okay, then immortality is no longer a notion. Is love gone for you now? That is a separate question, but I'll answer it. No, I haven't completely given up on love, Heathrow said, but did not elaborate. Leftor chose not to ask why. The two knights rode for 2 days until they had reached the outskirts of the Calamity's lair. It was known to sow chaos in the area, and to look further into the land was to see desolation and discord. The sky felt different here. The weather held no rhyme or reason. Lightning flashed on the face of a placid red sky. Leftor and Heathrow dismounted and gazed at the waiting abyss as if defying death itself. Heathrow handed the young knight the reins of his horse. He shouldn't perish with me. If ever you are tasked with killing this beast and you come across my corpse, please retrieve my sword. Heathrow turned towards the ever-changing chaotic lands. You're going in there right now? Leftor asked. I don't see the point in delay. If I die today or tomorrow, what's the difference? You aren't still thinking to follow me into death, are you? Leftor had went back and forth with that thought for the entirety of the trip. What was his loyalty to a disgraced brother who wished to die for fairly legitimate reasons? His conclusion was, if he were to die beside Heathrow, he would disappoint him and make his death feel all the more pointless than it already was. I don't plan on going unless you wish it. You have but to say a single word and I will hold fast to your side. Heathrow pat Leftor on the shoulder in a moment of genuine thanks. You don't plan to lay down without a fight? Leftor asked. Never. If I am to die, I'd rather it raging against death itself than bemoaning my lot in life. Leftor nodded, but there was a remorseful expression of grief painted on his face. I will wait a day before I assume the worst and move on. You're a good man, Leftor. Promise me you'll never be like me and forget your reason to be. Leftor nodded and smiled as if he received the message with those last words of inspiration. Heathrow turned into the chaotic swirling mass that was the domain of Calamity. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this tale. But come back next time and we can hear the rest of it. Adderall ain't got no time to play. He is out of here. Bye-bye. And I look at the camera in a Ferris Buellerian way. And I'm like, oh, you guys are still here. Go home.